Hello and welcome to Copper's Corner podcast. This is episode 2. And on this episode, we'll be talking to Dublin singer-songwriter by the name of Walker Tex. And we'll be chatting about the legendary Neil Young. Say hello, Walker. How are you today?
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks very much for coming on. And this should be a absolute whopper of an episode as well, because this is a legendary folk and rock singer, I suppose you could say.
We're covering a huge influence across two genres.
And he goes over lots of genres over the course of his career as well, of course. He's done 40 albums, I think, isn't that
right? there's some of them, I think, when you get to like 15th, 20th studio album, you're like, what? This guy has just been pumping out albums.
Yes.
Just putting us all to shame, the amount of work and albums that this guy's put out in his career. And I think that number is only taken into account is kind of solo stuff. It's not taken into account previous Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
And the Buffalo, Springfield stuff. And there's a lot. He's a very prolific man. And of course, before we get into it, I just want to shout out our social medias. So if you want to follow the podcast, go to Copper's Corner Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And if you want to help support the show, I have a buymeacoffee.com/Copper's Corner Podcast. And before we go any further again, Walker, would you like to shout out where people can find you?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Instagram under Walker Tex 69. You'll be able to check out my music on all digital streaming platforms as well. Walker Tex.
Brilliant. And before we get to Neil Young, we talk about yourself. So you're obviously based in Dublin, you were saying, near Blanchardstown. And tell us a bit about your music career to date. When did you release your first song?
Yeah, so music career to date's been largely covers, which has been kind of the best way to start, I think, when you're trying to hone your own kind of sound. So I've been playing, if I take it back, I've been playing guitar on and off since about 13.
Yeah.
So went through my grunge phase, went through my new metal phase, and as I've started to calm down, we're into the folk phase. The nice and chilled phase.
Wholeheartedly relate to that.
Life has a way of slowing you down.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I guess I kind of got more serious about music and exploring different avenues within that around 2 years ago. So I started picking up and really looking into how do I start releasing music, and you get into the music as a business side of things. So you live as a teenager, it's creative expression. And then as you get older and get more serious, you realize there's business there and you have to address those things. So
it is the music business after all.
Exactly. But for me, around 2 years ago, I would have got more serious and starting to explore how to get music out there, how to build an audience and start collaborating with other musicians. I hadn't been in a band for quite a while, and I wasn't really finding anyone. So I thought, you know what, I'll just start doing my own thing, because you're full control and it'll be nice, and we can jam with others or get session musicians in to help out here and there.
Yeah.
But it's just been largely covers, and this year I've really started to work on the songwriting process with a producer friend of mine. It is going well, and there is original material due to come out very soon. But it's been a whole new side of it, doing covers and kind of reverse engineering them. You get to know them, you get to know what parts you're going to change, and it's somewhat familiar. Whereas you might agree, when you go into songwriting yourself, it's a whole open thing. It's a beast. Like where do you start? How do you start? So
how do you know where you're going right? How do you know where you're going wrong?
This is it.
It's completely experimental.
We're all our worst own critics as well. So when you finally finish the track and you listen to it 5 days later, you're like, no, we got to change this, we got to change that. Just never it would never get finished. Get
rid of it. Start again.
This can never see the light of day.
But I suppose we all I suppose every musician gets started on covers. So I've been in many bands over the years, and pub bands and this, that, and they're playing covers, and I have to say, your covers are they're all on Spotify and iTunes and everywhere you can get now. But I listen to them all, and you get really happy songs, and you kind of turn down the happy dial, but in a really good way. It's like you get Hey Ya and Come Up and See Me, Make Me Smile, that song, and you kind of, they're melancholic, kind of atmospheric, chill kind of a vibe to them, and they're really, really nice. Like you kind of, something like you're floating in a fish tank, kind of almost. You get that vibe off them, and I mean that in the absolute best way possible.
Oh, totally,
like,
totally.
Yeah.
But and yeah, I think you've given away the secret sauce there, which is why I probably chose the right time to go into writing my own material. Yeah. The jig is up.
But what inspired you to kind of get those songs and kind of change them in such a way that they're like almost unrecognizable, in that you've made them your own sound, you've made them your own to an extent? What inspired you to do it that way?
I think that was always the challenge, because I mean the collection of songs that are on Spotify, so for anyone that does check them out, they may seem pretty eclectic when you go in, but it's just that these songs kind of, they happened at significant times in my life, and that's why I've remembered them, right? So from there I've kind of thought, okay, well, those are songs that I'm really, really familiar with. Let's start there in terms of music and this journey I'm about to go on. And it was just a case of, I always kind of lean towards the more, let's put it this way, I went through an emo phase. So I lean towards the darker side.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's where I was wanting to start, was to see like how dark can we take them and kind of tone them down. So it was finding that balance, but it's because the song's already written, you're kind of trying to live vicariously through what someone else has laid down and make it your own. So just leaning towards those kind of minor progressions instead of major, the simple little things, and then adding in little melodies here and there, and just the way we would look at the vocal melody as well and change it. It's fun. It's fun to make those light songs a little bit dark and still kind of maintain.
Yeah. You actually, like the song Hey Ya by Outkast, like it sounds like a really happy song, but when you're singing, I kind of listened really closely to the lyrics. They're actually kind of dark. Like, we're in denial about how happy, or how happy less, or what's the lyric? Why are we in denial about our
it's
terrible life or something?
It's terrible. I can't even remember. I've played the song 100 million times over. But yeah, I know what you mean, because even like normally how these come about, I could be scrolling, or I'll think, okay, right, that song, I'd like to try that, and I'll go search for it, learn it, and read the lyrics and get really familiar. And there's some of the songs I look at and like, there's no way they said this. I need this verified. Like, it can't be the lyric.
Yeah, you get surprised by some of these songs. They're like the most dark, depressing lyrics under this facade of happiness. It's very strange sometimes. But yeah.
Semi-Charmed Kind of Life was one of those in the 90s. That was I think that was a song based on addiction to heroin, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But it's the most upbeat song used in all the big films for those upbeat scenes.
Yeah, and it's all those 90-teen films and stuff.
Yeah. And when you see the interviews with the guys who wrote it, they're like, no, this is not happiness at all.
Yeah. It's fun. And then it's a funny thing, if you ever have you tried to write a happy song? It's like the hardest thing to do, because it so quickly turns into like a cheese ball of a song. And it's so hard to do like a decent happy song.
Yeah. Everyone can tap into the dark side, but like trying to get across your happiness without coming across as cheesy or really, really corny, it just doesn't work. It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. But tell us, what's your song coming out in September, you said? Tell us about that song.
Yeah, so it's not the last of the covers, but the phasing out of covers. We'll go with that as the party line.
You're going into your original phase.
Yeah, so we done a cover of The Importance of Being Idle by Oasis.
Okay.
And what we're going for is this kind of outlaw folk kind of style. So we're in the middle of this transition and trying to really hone that sort of sound. So this is the first idea that myself and my producer Mali Think Escapes, check him out on Instagram as well if you have time. But we basically took that, and similar to going to that darker process, flipped on its head, and we're going for this kind of just more folk. It's like watching a really loud Western film.
Okay.
So we wanted those sort of, the train sounds, the harmonicas, things in the distance. We wanted to build a really nice space around the track when we kind of reconstructed it. So we've got that coming out on the 12th of September.
Brilliant. So I will for sure put the links to your socials and the pre-save link to your song in the description below of this podcast.
Awesome.
And let me know. I'll put your producer's, what's his name again?
Yeah. It's Mally, I think, is Stapes.
Right, I'll put that in.
Don't worry, I will write that down. Don't
worry. I'll put that in the description as well, by all means. But yeah, let's get into the meat of today's episode, where we talk about the legend that is Neil Young. And to be honest with you, I'm familiar with his, most famous songs. But before I did the research on this episode, I didn't really have too much of a relation to him. I didn't, it wasn't one of my top singers. But now, after I did the research on him, and I listened to a lot of his songs the last few days, I'm actually head over heels kind of converted.
Yeah.
And we're even wearing our flannel shirts in honor.
We're representing.
Exactly. But we'll start off, I suppose, let us know, what kind of influence has he had on you over the years, and influence on your music?
Well, the influence for me is all about the sound. So I think, like, if you take it back to those, you mentioned earlier, those Buffalo Springfield days and that kind of sound when it was really coming alive. When Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young formed, they were getting the sound was just progressing and progressing at each stage they went. And it was always this, it's hard to describe, it's this warm, the warm tone from the guitars, everything's wooden cabin feel, like
it's that
very
analog sound.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was the analog sound, and it just worked wherever they were recording. Like every time, it was just exponentially getting better. And then when Neil Young done some of the more kind of electric sounding stuff, like the song Ohio, there's more of this electric twang. Kind of just verges from folk to country, and kind of almost teeters in between the genres for a little bit. And it was always just how they were able to get their sound. I'm a big fan of that warm, rich sound coming out of an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
And it's something that I'll probably try and replicate till my last day.
Absolutely. And you talk, like, sound is hugely important for me as well. I'm a sound engineer, so I love recording, getting the best out of instruments.
Yeah.
And of course, Neil Young, he's an absolute audio nut as well. We talk about it later, but he created his own music player called the Pono, or Pono, whichever way you want to say. Did you hear about that?
I never knew this. This is news to me.
I think we'll get into that a bit later. So, but he's a great proponent of getting the full, rich analog sound onto a record or a CD, I suppose. But of course, like a lot of today's music is very digital, which is, it lacks a lot of the warmth and the air actually moving, creating sound waves, and giving you that warm richness in the sound. So he's a great proponent of warm, you hear like the guitarist's fingers moving on the strings.
That's it. It's creating that live feel for a studio album. And I think it's like Pink Floyd were famous for kind of doing that as well. They'd have a lot of mad sounds here and there.
Yeah. And
you could hear people talking in the background over the original recordings. Neil Young took it to a whole other level. I mean, having that intimate detail in a song, it just makes you feel like you're there. You close your eyes and you're at just Neil Young is in front of you playing. You just get that feeling from it. And it's something I don't think you mentioned there. A lot of stuff now is very much digitally enhanced. You lose all that. People would rather take that out and throw those little nuances and intimate bits away than keep those in the track and keep that character.
Yeah. And he's also he's a one take kind of a guy as well, isn't he? Like in the studio,
very and I don't know, he must just go to some perfect little place. And all this just comes out in one take, and it's for the amount of albums he's doing, he would probably have to work that way.
Because probably know as much as I do when you're recording and you're just trying to hit a few chords, When you're not recording, you can play the chords no problem. Like you play it like you're absolute natural at it. Then as soon as you hit record, it's like it's just you ruin it completely. So you have to take tons of takes to get this one little section.
Everyone's a rock star till that little red light goes on.
Exactly, red light fever.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get into his history, I suppose, and go back to where it started. He was actually born in November 12th, 1945, just as World War II kind of came to a close. But he was born up in Toronto, Canada, so he's actually a Canadian. So what about that? I suppose
what about that,
I would have thought he was American, but that's the kind of thing a lot of people would think Canadians are American anyway. Because
it's that old adoption thing. If you get a Scottish or an Irish sports personality and they start to do well, you start to see England sneak in there, and it's all of a sudden British sports personality. It's one of those situations in the music world, I think.
Yeah, and so his parents were Scott and Edna, and Scott was actually a sports journalist, a Canadian journalist, sports writer, and novelist, and he went to all the big games and he covered all the big games. He's well known. I think he wrote like 30 books in his profession, so he was a professional in his own way as well. And but as a kid, he had a brother called Robert, and they spent their life in a town called Omimi. That's the name. Omimi. But apparently, one evening, I think when he was 8 or 9, he woke up from sleep and he had a terrible pain in his shoulder, and so parents brought him to the hospital, and turned out he had polio. But he thankfully managed to survive, and this was at a time when a lot of people were dying from polio. Yeah. This is before the whole polio vaccine became a big thing, and polio kind of went away. So he had a hard time with that, and he also had epilepsy, type 1 diabetes. So by 1951, his health deteriorated so far he was unable to walk. So he actually had a really, really tough time of it as a kid. Now, did you know this? This
is all news to me. So you've done the research to put me to shame here on this one, but yeah, that's news to me. But that kind of gives you a little insight as to maybe how he's able to draw such darkness into his music.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, so he didn't have a good start in life, I suppose you could say. But he during when he was overcoming his ailments, I suppose he began taking interest in music. And his father bought him a ukulele. So he actually started on the ukulele.
Started on the uke.
Yeah.
I can't imagine of all the instruments. I can't see it.
Yeah. But I think it wasn't long now before he converted over to the guitar. Yeah. So you're a guitarist yourself, obviously. It's you said you started when you were 13?
Yeah, on and off since 13.
Yeah, same here. I was about 12, I think 12 or 13. So it's just a big part of my life as well. Like once you have a guitar in your hand, it's kind of hard to get rid of it.
It's hard to change. I recently got a loan of a banjo.
Yeah.
Thinking, this will be a breeze. And
not at all.
there's I've yet to find something harder than trying to learn banjo after years of playing the guitar. It really flips everything in its head. So it's interesting.
Yeah,
I can hold it well. I look well holding it. I realize
they're great in pictures.
Yeah, they're brilliant for the content shoots. But playing, I'm not there yet.
That's it. Yeah, I've yet to try one, but I'd love to put my hands on one someday and have a go over it because get that real fast speed picking going. Yeah. Sounds class. Yeah, he played a bit of banjo as well. So before he got the guitar. But apparently his parents were married. His parents' marriage had been strained, and in 1960 they divorced. So following the split, Robert, his brother, stayed with his father in Toronto, and his mother, Edna, or Rassie, as she was also called, relocated to Winnipeg with the teenage Neil Young. And he was at this stage way more interested in music than academics. Probably like myself and yourself growing up.
Yeah, I think there's a pattern. There's a pattern in certain musicians, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, I think apparently Winnipeg during the 60s was like the place to be if you were a musician.
Yeah, I think for the folk stuff, it seems to come up a lot.
Hmm.
I can't remember why. I don't remember reading a few articles about it, but obviously grunge starts in Seattle, and then you had there was a revivalist '60s thing up in Portland there in the mid '90s for a while. I think it's one of those where just certain little areas just gravitate a certain type of musician, certain genres, and just kind of flows.
Yes,
Hell of a place to be in the like. When's this? This is like early '60s
this
now.
is
Huh?
early
We're in the
60s. Yeah, like 1960, pretty much 1961. So he hasn't got to LA yet, but while he was in Winnipeg, he started, he's playing in a few bands, and he formed the folk rock group, the Squires, in '63. And he actually dropped out of high school and started performing in clubs and coffee houses in the area. First with the Squires, and then later as a solo act. So he knew what he wanted to do from a young age.
Yeah. You gotta admire that confidence as well. Coming through that kind of life, and then still deciding, nope, I'm gonna go this way, because it's not easy. It's no secret, but man, that is some confidence.
Yeah.
But a really good belief in himself, and look at the music we have today to celebrate the fact that he did go down life that way.
And obviously, like, the influence he's had on like a wealth of other musicians throughout the decades as well.
Totally.
Yeah. But then he's making his rounds on the Canadian folk circuit, and he started rubbing shoulders, I suppose you could say, with other up and coming Canadian musicians like Joni Mitchell and the band The Guess Who. And of course, like Joni Mitchell and The Guess Who, they were huge in their own right.
Joni Mitchell is a huge influence in the folk scene as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe like Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, was it Gordon Lightfoot? Like all these people just move in the same circle, and every one of them was a genius in their own right. It was a good dinner party to be at.
If some party's going on outside, gee,
man.
Yeah. And at this time as well, he actually met Stephen Stills. So he later went on to do Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young.
And Young. And then minus Young.
The name changes every now and again, but they actually started a band called the Myna Birds, the MYNA Birds. And that had the future funk star Rick James on bass guitar. Did you know this?
No.
Rick James, bitch.
Oh, no way. This can't be real.
Oh, Jesus. It's mad.
This is amazing.
Yeah. They were, gigging and such, and they were about to get contract with the legendary Motown label, or their legendary Motown label, I suppose, in 1966, before they disbanded, before they could finish their album. And the actual reason that they disbanded was because Rick James got arrested because he was AWOL from the American military. So he got arrested before they could finish their album. And that basically put an end to that.
I never knew the reason it ended.
Yeah.
But because someone going AWOL.
That's it, yeah. But then after this, he was obviously very, very frustrated, because this band he thought, this is it now. This is the band I'm going to go places in. But that fell apart because Rick James was a mad fella. So
we all know what happened there.
That's a whole episode in itself, James.
Someone will come on, and that has to be the topic, is Rick James.
But yeah, he basically, himself and his friend Bruce Palmer got into Young's brand new Pontiac hearse that he had just bought. And did you know about the hearse? No.
No.
Yeah, he bought
the hearse does ring a bell, actually, but I don't know if I'm getting my stories mixed up.
So yeah,
I do recall something about a hearse.
Yeah. So he bought a black hearse, and him and his mate Bruce hopped in it and made an old drive down to Los Angeles, California. So this starts like the next chapter in Neil Young's life.
Like I've always wanted to like if I could do that, that would be like to live in that area. You don't hear it. Obviously, people still go out there to make it, but I think maybe I just over romanticize it in my own head. But that you hear so many musicians, actors, and everything, they take that trip to LA and then they hit it from there.
Yeah,
you don't
or they become waiters and
yeah. The reality of today is that every waiter you meet will be an upcoming actor. But yeah, it just seems like back then it worked. Like, you know, if you done it, it was just guaranteed to work for you.
Yeah, I suppose if you get into the right circle of friends and the right group of people and meet the right people and shake hands and get the right gig and get the right person to see you, then happy days. But that's obviously a whole game of chance as well.
It's a big risk to take. Like, I mean, I've been through some hairy moments in my life, but to give up everything and just be that sure of what you're going to do, that's your one goal. I think it's a level of determination after a very bad start to life. But again, with the network, I think he'd built up by that stage, he was probably raising a few ears by then. People did. He had his core audience built, I think, at that stage before he went down.
Yeah. So he went down to Los Angeles, and this was 1966. So this was, the summer of love era.
What a time to be in Los Angeles, in California in general. What a time.
Exactly. And so when he was down there, he ran into Stills, his old mate Stephen Stills, and him, Young, Stills, Palmer, and Richard Fury, and Dewey Martin came together to form the band Buffalo Springfield. And then they released their self-titled album in December 1966, and it managed to crack the charts, it says. And the single For What It's Worth became top 10. But,
classic.
I haven't had a chance to go and delve into Buffalo Springfield properly myself now yet, but what do you think of the band themselves?
Well, for me, it's just that one track. It's another one of those iconic tracks.
Is it For What It's Worth? Is it?
But I just that intro, and you see it in all the usual '60s films. It's one of those ones that everyone of any age has heard that song at some point in their life, and it's just another one of those that just resonates and stays with you. You know.
But the band started getting a large following, and it was acclaimed for its experimental and skilled instrumental pieces, inventive songwriting and harmony-focused vocal composition. But apparently, like, a few people are saying they could have been like greater than the Beatles, and they were like at that like level of kind of almost, I suppose, virtuosity. They were really, really talented musicians writing great songs. But apparently, Stills and Young kind of clashed heads on what would you call it? Artistic differences. That was what you could say. The old cliche.
But I think to take on the Beatles, I think especially when we look at what genre they would have been not boxed into, but they would have been leaning that sort of folksy side. Whereas the Beatles kind of treaded the line between pop and maybe slight folk bits in there, but it was largely kind of pop rock, I guess, as it was up and coming.
They certainly started off pop, like I Want to Hold Your Hand and all this kind of stuff, and then they kind of later on then, well, actually, like, when you think of it, the Beatles weren't even going that long, and they stopped touring because it just became too crazy. All the girls were like screaming at them, and the PA systems weren't.
It was just sheer chaos day to day, like.
And the PA systems weren't not strong enough to even just project the sound to the front, first few rows, let alone a stadium of screaming women. And they started kind of progressing into like, rock and experimental stuff and all these kind of things. Yeah. So, they kept going for a while, but then 1968, there was the artistic differences kind of put an end to it, and Neil Young basically just said, "Hey, I'm done with this now. I'm off." And apparently, he is a kind of he can be a hard guy to work with in certain ways.
I've heard that a lot. That he is very the people define it as hard to work with, and some say he's just very strict in his process and how he
Yeah.
likes to do things.
It's how you,
It's the same thing.
Yeah, because I was listening to, he was on the Conan O'Brien podcast, and I was listening to him. This was like, I think 2 years ago, or last year, I think it was, just before his album Ohio came out, which was 2019. But he was saying that, yeah, I wouldn't work with me, he said.
If the artist is saying that, then there's definitely some issues there. I wonder. I need to see some. I'll need to look out some behind the scenes footage of his recordings and in the studios and see can we capture any of these intense moments from the process.
Apparently, he did record the making of that now, but I haven't had a chance to watch it now. But that could be a good thing
could be
to
an interesting
look into.
one. Yeah.
But so he after he left Buffalo Springfield, he went out on his own, became a solo artist again, and he signed with Reprise Records in 1969 and released a self-titled To Mixed Reviews. So he followed up just a few months later with Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. And are you familiar with his first album?
For the first few, like for me, in all honesty, when I kind of was going through the younger years, there wasn't much resonated there until he done Harvest, which it was 1972.
Right.
So I'd say he's really at the rate he's pumping out albums again. He's really starting to hit his stride at this stage.
Yeah.
And that's where you start to see just. But that album for me, like it's one of those ones where you just have to have headphones on. You have to be hearing everything. You have it raised right up, and you're just in the zone. It was just like start to finish. It's a really well produced album.
Yeah, and it was actually on his second album that the drummer Ralph Molina, bass player Billy Talbot, and guitarist Dan Whitten backed him up, and they collectively became known as Crazy Horse. So they were the band Crazy Horse, because obviously you hear Neil Young and Crazy Horses. So that's where they started off. And basically, he got kind of lauded for his raw sound. And he had his distinctly melancholy and untrained voice, he says, on tracks such as Cinnamon Girl and Down by the River. And eventually went gold, the second album. But yeah, he has this kind of voice that it's kind of high pitched, I suppose, in a way. And how would you describe his voice?
Like I remember the first song that I'd really heard was Heart of Gold. And then that's when I went and got that album. But yeah, like I remember listening to that track, and you're not expecting that voice at all.
Yeah.
I don't know what I was expecting, like. But I remember when I'd first been introduced to the song and listened to it, I was like, it's a weird kind of extreme. I feel you've got these nice sort of dark, warm chord progressions, and the other kind of the harmonica that kicks in, and then this real. I agree, it is a real melancholy kind of voice. It reminds me of like how Radiohead done their kind of more cinematic stuff. It was this real, it's a hard one to describe, but it's completely his own. There's there's rarely anyone that can replicate that or can do what he was able to do. Now, I kind of like the idea that he wasn't classically trained, and he's defined as an untrained vocalist. There's something a bit punk and a bit grunge about that in itself, that he made it that far.
He gives that kind of a rough edge to his voice, I suppose. The kind of, he doesn't hit the notes absolutely perfect, but you don't want him to at the same time.
You don't want that. It works, and again, I think he goes back to just having that live feel that you've got everything in there, warts and all, is coming through on these albums.
Yeah, and I suppose after this, then it came into the Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young era. So Young, while he was doing these albums, he did reconnect with Stills again, and they've had artistic differences in the past, But Stills had formed a new group with David Crosby of the Byrds. And the Byrds, I think Eric Clapton was in the Byrds as well at some point, and Jimmy Page, I think, or that was the Yardbirds.
The Yardbirds was one of the it was Rod Stewart, and was it Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood maybe?
Okay.
No, I'm thinking of the Faces. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's a few Birds and Yardbirds and all this kind of stuff.
They've all been in each other's bands at some point. It was the 60s. It was a crazy time.
Crazy time. And none of them can remember any of it. It's great.
Yeah.
What's to say? If you can remember the 60s, you weren't there.
You weren't there.
But yeah, Stills had the new band with David Crosby and Graham Nash of the Hollies. So it was Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So they wanted Young to join in with them. But of course, Neil Young wouldn't join until he had equal billing. So they had to add in the and Young at the end. So Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. But they actually went and played the Woodstock Festival in August of 1969, which that could nearly be a whole episode in itself. That was a bonkers.
There's so many stories that came out of that. It's not just the artist performances, but everything that went on in the crowd. You put the Hells Angels in there doing like security for Rolling Stones and stuff.
Yeah. I think that was the Altamount festival. I think that was
around
the same
that's
time.
Right. Sorry, it was. Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
but there were.
Yeah, but the Woodstock was like 100,000 people in this field, and there was no toilets, no food, very little. There was roadblocks of cars going for miles and miles. There's no parking, no nothing. It was just, we're trying to gig in a field. Come along. That was it.
Oh, when you boil a festival down to what it is, a gig in a field, it doesn't have the same ring to it though.
So that was like a legendary and iconic gig, and of course, Crosby, Stills, Young, and Nash played it, and they obviously got a good bit of clout, I suppose, off that. Became fairly famous, and they were actually at times referred to as the American Beatles. But then again, of course, Neil Young went at loggerheads with his bandmates, and he left the group again. I think at one point he just didn't turn up to practice, or
he ghosted them.
They were just about to go on a tour, and he said, "Nah, I'm not going." That was it.
Classic Young.
Yeah.
Classic Young.
So he went to record in 1970. 1970, he released his album After the Gold Rush, which some people say he's one of his masterpieces. But are you very familiar with that album yourself? No,
not too familiar with that one. For me, it's Harvest.
It became Harvest, yeah. And he has a song on it called Southern Man, which is a great song in itself. Really catchy little melody in it, I suppose you could say. But that was a condemnation of the racism that angered many. That was a condemnation of racism, and it angered many Southerners, and that would inspire Lynyrd Skynyrd's "Sweet Home Alabama," because of course Neil Young had that story about coming out of a bar down in the South somewhere, maybe Alabama, and he was jumped by a few rednecks, I suppose you could say, and he's beaten up, and of course he wrote this song about that. And then Lynyrd Skynyrd went on to say, heard old Neil sing about her, heard Young put her down.
They have that lyric,
Neil Young will remember a Southern man doesn't need him around. So obviously, there was like a beef back in the day before.
A feud within the most kind of chill genre of music out there. There appears to be this feud.
Yeah. So and he had a song, "The Needle and the Damage Done." I listened to that today, and obviously that's about losing friends to, I suppose, heroin and all this, all different drugs.
This is where I think this is where it turned very, very dark in terms of the lyrics and what he was putting into them.
Absolutely. Then of course, he went. That was Needle and the Damage Done was on the album Harvest, which was a year after the Gold Rush. So he's like putting out an album every year. It's like bang, bang, bang.
Even his single releases, like I think as a like Heart of Gold and An Old Man, I think one was in January, then one was in April. And he was just just pumping these out consistently. So he's got albums coming every year, and then he's got singles coming out. Like I don't know if it's just an overflow of creativity or one of the most cleverest music marketing plays ever.
Yeah, it does come back to bite him later on. We'll get to that though. But yeah, tell us, obviously Old Man and Heart of Gold. Heart of Gold is actually Neil Young's only #1 ever. Of all the songs.
The album itself, I think, reached like 30 on the Billboard.
Yeah.
Or 31. It's in that area. And yeah, he had one track off it that hit #1.
Yeah, so he was always up there in the charts, but he just had that one song that reached #1, and that was Heart of Gold. And of course, Old Man was like, basically when you go on to say, if you want to Spotify and look at Neil Young and his top songs, is I think it's Heart of Gold and then Old Man.
Yeah.
It's like the two of them are just the most well known. Of course, I knew them fairly well from just hearing them over the years. How could you not? This
exactly. They're just prolific tracks. Played over and over again.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on those songs? And obviously they're your favorites as well. They've probably influenced you a lot.
Yeah, Heart of Gold, kind of the harmonica and hearing for me, it's I went in on the reverb at the beginning of that track. When the harmonica kicks in, there's just this slight little bit of reverb, natural reverb, and it just, I don't know, it gets me every time when it kicks in that way.
Yeah.
And his intros were always very kind of typically 70s folk sounded. Those James Taylor kind of little licks and plays. He had a lot of that in his music, and at the start of Heart of Gold, you hear that, and then harmonica kicks in. It's just created this beautiful little space for the sound.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, everyone, even if you don't think you're familiar with the songs, you definitely know. It's like,
oh yeah,
I've heard it. You might not even know it's Neil Young, but you hear that song, it's, oh yeah, that's Neil Young, straight away. Yeah, obviously they're his biggest songs. I suppose like when he was on top of the world at this stage, but then it kind of started going a little bit downhill in his personal life. He had a girlfriend called Carrie Snodgrass, which in itself is a fantastic name. Snodgrass. Snodgrass. She was an award-winning actor. And this was at the end of '72. They had a son together called Zeke, but he was born with cerebral palsy. So she had to set aside her acting career to care for him. But then, of course, in Crazy Horse, there was the guitarist Dan Whitten. And basically, he was going to start touring with Neil Young again. But Neil Young said, look, this fella he was on heroin and whatever else. And Neil just goes, look, if you're coming on tour with me, put aside that heroin and I'll have you, come on, work with me. But that didn't plan out. That didn't pan out. Of course, he went back on the stuff fairly quickly, and Neil had to fire him. But then he returned back to his home, and he died of a drug overdose not too long after that. So that did put a big dampener on his life, as well as obviously his kid with cerebral palsy. So I suppose these events were compounded by a string of relatively unsuccessful projects, including the 1972 film Journey Through the Past and the live album Times Fade Away and 1974's On the Beach. Are you familiar with those projects?
No, not at all.
Yeah, so that was kind of a hard time in his life. And I think a lot of his lyrics started, getting darker again after his friend died. But then himself and Snodgrass split up in 1975, and the same year he released Tonight's the Night, which was recorded shortly after Whitten's death and reflected Young's frame of mind with its dark character and themes. And then also the album Zuma, a hard-edged album featuring Crazy Horse's new lineup with Frank Sampedro replacing Whitten on guitar. And again, are you familiar with these?
Who was Frank Sampedro?
Yeah,
Frank did he play for anyone before? Do we have any info on?
I'll have a quick look now, because that's wouldn't be too familiar with myself. Yeah, American artist, mainly known from his collaboration with Neil Young. And yeah, that's all I can really see going quickly.
So he done one collab and then the guy's gone. But what a gig to have, though.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the second half of the 1970s would, thankfully get a bit more positive. He teamed up again with Stephen Stills. Jeez, they couldn't get enough of each other.
Some people just don't learn, do they?
They don't learn. This is what the 1, 2, 3, 4th time they're getting back together, isn't it?
Those two.
Yeah. So they recorded "Long May You Run," which reached number 26 on the charts and went gold. And in 77, he released a more country flavored "Stars and Bars," and as well as a triple LP compilation "Decade," which featured a handpicked selection of his work up to that point. So it's kind of, I suppose, a best of.
The first of the best ofs.
Yeah, I suppose he had plenty of.
There's a few very good now, but there's a few compilations, and there's a heck of a few live albums as well.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. Then next year, it became better. Apparently, he released the album "Comes a Time," and that broke into the top 10. And then he married Peggy Martin, who was a waitress at a restaurant near his ranch. Who I think he actually sat down. After his relationship broke up with his other girlfriend and his friend, he sat down and he just kind of poured his heart out to this waitress, and she listened, and they became friends and so on. And then they married, and she would actually inspire many of his songs in the future. Most notably, "Unknown Legend," apparently. So, yeah, and then he embarked on another tour with Crazy Horse called "Rust Never Sleeps." And it's just, he kept releasing, like...
He doesn't stop. He's a machine.
Like, there's just so many releases I could list off. But, yeah, he became very experimental in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so he had album "Hawks and Doves," which is a collection of acoustic and country flavored songs recorded over several years. Sometimes very political, right-leaning sentiments alienated some of his audience. And then he came out with a Hard Dead Reactor, and then he mixed it up even a bit more with trance. And this was the album where he actually started using synthesizers and a vocoder, which is basically...
I remember just reading a lot of different buzz about that one particular one when he did make the move to starting to use more up-to-date instruments.
Yeah. Apparently he kept like changing his personas as well. He's kind of genre swapping a lot, and then he changed his look. So apparently for, I think, Vocoder, he cut his hair, wore like big aviator sunglasses all the time, and then started using synths. And like this Vocoder is like basically kind of makes your voice sound like a robot.
Yeah.
In a way. But as you said earlier on, he's obviously very prolific. But this was like the last straw for Geffen, which was his new labels, who actually, I think, was it David Geffen, I think was the owner. He sued Neil Young for giving him albums that he just couldn't release. Just like unreleasable, just like crap.
It's the equivalent of a performance review at your day job. Really, your boss brings you in and says, like what the hell is this?
Can't release this.
Yeah.
So yeah, he left Geffen, and
I have to wonder, was there a bit of him playing the game at that stage, thinking, do you know what, this label's got me tied into 50 albums, I'm tired, maybe that was his motivation to get them out so fast. But then he was thinking, well, if we lower quality, they have to let me go.
Exactly.
It's the perfect crime.
You never know. I think that's what Prince did. Remember when Prince, he changed his name to the symbol?
Yeah.
The artist formerly known as Prince.
He really tried to screw over the record label.
They had him locked in for, multiple albums, and he was just not happy with them. And so he just, put out a ton, and, like an album nearly every few months.
Yeah.
And he just tried to basically force them to fire him and rip up the contracts because he just wants to get out.
It's an unreal way of getting out of things, but Yeah, I think that's kind of the trend. That's what these guys, I think, had to do back then. It was these elaborate kind of ploys to how fast can I get fired right now?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. So that year, 1983, was a tough one, and he put out a rockabilly offering called "Everybody's Rockin'," and with that and the Trans album with the synthesizers was that last straw, and Geffen filed a $3 million lawsuit against him for producing what they termed unrepresentative music. So I suppose from
how,
their perspective, Neil Young was like a folk singer, and then he started putting out
yeah.
rockabilly and
But
synthesizer, and it's a hard one to.
how do you box off that creativity when you're writing up your record contract? How do you say
That's
that
it.
you will only be producing top-notch folk material and that's it? There has to be. What a weird lawsuit, but yeah, again another story that I do remember slightly.
Yeah. But yeah, he was also sued for child support from Carrie Snodgrass, our old friend, um, for their children, who also had like cerebral palsy and epilepsy. So Jay-Z and Mac, they had a whole heap of health conditions. Of course, I don't think we mentioned as well. Neil Young himself, he had epilepsy, and it was actually brought on when he was playing with Buffalo Springfield back in the day. They started using lights. This is back in the 60s, so they started using lights for the first time, and strobe lights became a thing.
Yeah.
So they'd be playing, and the strobe like dunk dunk dunk, and he'd actually pass out on stage. He'd have a fit because of the strobe. And apparently, he used to have to like hold out the guitar so someone would grab the guitar, stop the guitar from falling because he was going. Save the guitar, whatever you do.
Oh man.
Yeah. So apparently unwilling to sacrifice his independence and artistic integrity to please his label, he eventually reached a deal with them in which he would take a pay cut for his next few albums. And this led to the heavily country Old Ways, 1985, with guest appearances by Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, two of my favorite guys. I must listen to this album now. I haven't listened to it. Yeah, have you heard this one yourself?
No, it's not one I'm too familiar with. I know he did he did collaborate and team up at one stage with them, but haven't dipped in.
Yeah. And then he had a new wave tinged album, Landing on Water, in 86, and another album called Life in 87. It's just like literally I could just like create a list and just start listing off these albums. It's unreal. Yeah, so yes, he became a model train collector. And did you know this about him? He's
he's apparently huge into the model railways.
And according to this article, he has a 700-foot model train track, but I'm sure it's probably after growing again since this was written. And he looked after his kids at this time as well. And he actually, his son Ben had cerebral palsy, and he actually developed a special controller for the son to be able to control the train. And actually, the controllers later formed the basis for a company called Lion Tech. So yeah, it kind of started a whole thing with that as well. Yeah, so that was a big thing with him, the trains. And then he became an activist in a way. He started participating in Farm Aid. Do you know about Farm Aid? This was back in the 1986. So basically, it was a big concert put on in America to help the American farmers that were faced with huge debt and mortgage debt and basically not looked after, by the companies paying out for their produce in the proper way. So they had Bruce Springsteen and Willie Nelson, John Mellencamp performing, and of course it's gone on for many years since. But then I suppose we get on to the next era where he became known as the godfather of grunge. So this is when he started actually, he made his return to Reprise Records in 88 with a blue and R&B focus, This Note's For You. And so the album featured a title track of the same name, which took aim at the commercialism in music. So MTV refused to play the video for it because he was taking a slight at them, he's giving them a dig. But it eventually won Video of the Year at the MTV Awards. And again, Young, the same year, Young reunited again with Crosby, Stills and Nash for Jilly Mag.
I thought we were done. You've run me a curveball. I thought we were done with this.
Yeah.
I thought we'd learned our lesson here.
So this is American Dream, which apparently it charted at number 16, but was panned by the critics. But then, so then we got on to, I think, one of the biggest songs that I know of. I've played it many times in pub bands and rock bands over the years. He released "Rockin' in the Free World" on the album Freedom in 1989, which was the year I was born. So
the year I was born as well. So I feel you. Don't worry.
So that's it's a great song. Like I've played it many times. It's one of those easy songs to play as well. It's not too difficult, and it is. You chug.
Exactly, and that's hitting it on the head right there. It's that sort of chug, and that's where you start to see this more overdriven kind of electric starting to creep in as well, and just making way for a whole new sound to take off.
Exactly. And that kind of endeared him to up-and-coming acts such as Sonic Youth, Dinosaur Jr., and Nirvana, several of whom contributed tracks for a tribute album released the same year, The Bridge, whose proceeds went to the Bridge School. I think that was a music school. But yeah, he became a huge influence on these new grunge bands as they became to be known. And he became known as the godfather of grunge. Yeah. So yeah, he kept going with Crazy Horse, and whereas at some point though, didn't he use Pearl Jam? Basically the members of Pearl Jam, except for the singer Eddie Vedder, he used them as like his backing band for a tour at some stage. Is that right? Do you know about that?
What year are we on now?
Yeah, I think this was 1990, 91. It doesn't say it in my notes here now, but I think I read somewhere that he did use basically the members of Pearl Jam. Oh, here we are. Sorry. Following you. Oh, this is 95. 95. He was backed by Pearl Jam on his highest charting album since 1972, Mirror Ball. And this was the same time in 95 he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for the first time. And he would be inducted again 2 years later with the other members of Buffalo Springfield. But yeah, he's actually one of the only singers to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice.
I was going to say that's a bit of an achievement. Like your whole life and then twice. So it was in the space of 2 years as well, which is pretty insane.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like Foo Fighters are the next, I think, to go into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and look how long. And that's of course spanning 2 bands as well for Dave Grohl.
Yeah,
and that's unreal.
Apparently he turned down the first induction, I suppose you could say, because he felt it was too commercial.
This is the whole thing. This is why he's been able to successfully spark a genre. He took what had went from just his teenage angst back in the 70s and stuff, and he's now this kind of elder sort of gent, putting it politely at this stage, and he's given his wisdom onto a new generation, and all those feelings of angst are either still there or just more heightened at this stage. And then the new generation just, perfect. We'll take that off your hands.
Of course, he during this time, like, he would have worn his flannel and jeans, and that would have inspired the likes of Nirvana and Pearl Jam to wear similar types of clothes. You know, the jeans with the rips in them and the flannel shirts.
Baggy flannel, pair of All-Stars, and some ripped blue jeans. And
that's all you need.
That's all it takes, man. That's all it takes.
Exactly. So rounding out the 1980s, Crazy Horse backed him up on a 96 album. Sorry, that doesn't make sense. Anyway, 96 album, Broken Arrow, with Crazy Horse. And then he supplies the sparse, moody soundtrack for Jim Jarmusch's Western Dead Man, which starred Johnny Depp. And then Jarmusch in turn made Young the focus of a 97 documentary, Year of the Horse, which I have not seen. Have you seen
I
that?
haven't dipped into this.
Yes, all right. So then we're talking into the 2000s. So we've skipped basically, the end of the 1990s. But in the wake of 9/11, the September 11th attacks, he recorded the patriotic Let's Roll, and then followed with the albums Are You Passionate and Greendale as a concept project with an accompanying film about a fictional town in California that allowed Young to explore the environmental themes about which he remained passionate about throughout his life. So he became a kind of an environmental activist at this time as well. And I think he went up against Monsanto at some point about
he's one of the famous names to go up against Monsanto.
Yeah, Monsanto were basically the agricultural chemical company that they obviously still are very big, and they used a lot of questionable chemicals to help keep down weeds and help fertilize.
They have the monopoly on it as well, as far as I know, in terms of what percentage. But we won't get into that.
That's a whole other.
That's probably a whole other podcast genre that we'll get into.
That's a whole other genre, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, he kept coming out with music. But then in 2005, he actually suffered a near fatal aneurysm that required brain surgery. And so when recovering for that, he finished work on a reflective acoustic-based Prairie Wind. And basically, that is a quiet work that addresses the issue of mortality in the wake of his illness and the passing of his father. And so yeah, he still had a tough time with it. So again, but he didn't fucking stop. He kept going in 2006.
What does he do? He records another album.
Just records an album. He released the angry protest album Living with War, which was inspired by the war in Iraq. Had such songs as Let's Impeach the President and Shock and Awe. And
these are very political heavy songs, I think.
But yeah, he wrote in the 2010s. Then he put out a let me see now. What's just a patriotic album, Americana, and Le Noise is another one, and double LP called Psychedelic Pill with the environmentally themed Story Tone, and 2015 the Monsanto Years, his 35th album. So he's just never stops.
Must have been one hell of a contract he signed, huh?
Yeah. So he put out an autobiography then as well, Waging Heavy Peace, which is a pretty good album, or a pretty good name actually, Waging Peace. So he's still touring, still going. But him and his wife, Peggy, divorced in 2014. And so he remained heavily involved with Farm Aid and the Global Poverty Project and Music Cares, and as well as championing various political and environmental causes. But in August 2018, he secretly married actress Daryl Hannah, and in 2020 he became an American citizen. So fair play to me. Daryl Hannah, she was in Kill Bill.
Yeah.
And what's that? Blade Runner. Back in the day,
it's a weird one. I don't think anyone would have put the two together. It seems like a very strange pairing to me.
Yeah. But by all means, they're happy and fair play to him.
That's it.
Yeah. But he kept going. In 2016, his Peace Trail, Hitchhiker, was actually recorded in 1976 and released in 2017. And in 2017, he also did The Visitor. And I think his latest release was Colorado. That's the one, Colorado, in 2019, which was later that was backed by Crazy Horse. But he was intending to tour with Crazy Horse in 2020, but then the world ended.
Exactly, yeah. Oh man!
But he went on.
When are we seeing? Is there any information on the next album? Because going by his timelines to date, he is overdue 2 or 3 albums.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not yet anyway. This was This was updated last month, I think. So there's no extra albums on the way yet. Anyway, I think Colorado was his last one, but he did a few fireside session concerts during the pandemic.
The old lockdown sessions.
Yeah, but I suppose something there that you didn't.
There's quite a lot. You've put me to shame. I feel like I've been just put to shame there and schooled. But no, there's a lot in there that you kind of pick up on from reading different reviews, and when you start to dip in and look at your idols that way and check their life history and stuff. But what a story, and no film, no biopic as of yet.
Oh.
I think he's actually,
I was watching a biography about him, and his biographer basically said that he was a hard man to get a hold of. Like he'd say, "Oh yeah, come on, we'll write a biography," but then he wouldn't talk to him for like a year or 2 years, and then he'd come along again, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, let's work on this," and then he'd disappear off again and just wouldn't want to do it.
Just sort of shies away from it. I'd say though, at depending on what stage he's at in his career, he's probably done by then. So he probably doesn't want to be in the spotlight anymore. He doesn't want to have these journalists or filmmakers. He's just done. And with leading a life that's very much going against the system and the grain, it just gives him extra fuel to say nope.
That's it, yeah. And actually, I have a few more, I suppose, facts and tidbits to throw in. His favorite guitar of choice is a 1953 Gibson Les Paul Gold Top, which in and of itself, if you had a 1953 Gold Top, they're worth around $250,000, I suppose, in if you have one of them today. But he painted it black, so now he calls it the Old Black. That's his name.
There's more reason to love him. He has something of so much monetary value.
Exactly. That's probably worth even more. Yeah, exactly.
Let's say that. Yeah, now that he has the notoriety that he has, it's definitely increased value. If you or I were to do that to our £250,000 Gibson, I think there would be there'd be tears in the room.
Yeah. But as I actually mentioned earlier on, he's obviously a big proponent. Words are failing me. Proponent of the audio, the warm analog sound.
Yeah.
And he actually came out with a music player. I won't say MP3 player because it's not an MP3 player. The whole idea behind MP3 players was, when the iPods came out, and I know I had multiple different types of MP3 player, hard drive disc players back in the day, and so on. Probably you were the same age. You probably had the same kind of.
I had the first very rustic one that looked like back then it just looked like a big brick of a hard drive.
Yes.
And it had a very basic screen on it, like an old beeper screen almost.
Yeah.
And that was the MP3 player until I think the more traditional and smaller USB ones came out.
So like the idea back in the day was, you didn't have a whole lot of hard drive space, and you wanted to get as much music as you could onto it. You wanted to get hundreds and thousands of tracks on it. So MP3s were basically, we're getting to like nerdy tech, music nerd territory now, but to basically compress music down so much to make it basically like 3 or 4 megabytes of a size of MP3, and compression kind of gets rid of a lot of the audio spectrum. Let's say a lot of the audio that wouldn't be very apparent to the usual casual listener, but it would, I suppose, take away a bit of the life out of the sound at the same time. Compressing, basically just squishing it down to make it as small as possible, and that does get rid of a bit of life of the sound. And so basically, he came out with an idea to create his own music player called the Pono, and he had a Kickstarter to do it. And he basically started making a few of them. But apparently, I did see at the time, there's like reviews of it and stuff, and it was fairly good by all accounts. And it's like full, like almost like FLAC, those FLAC audio files. I think it played FLAC, or it could have had its own, I'm not sure. But there was like full quality master sound almost. But they were very expensive. I think they were like €4,000 or something.
Yeah,
They're probably
it was obscene. I remember reading about them, and it was an obscene price that was being asked. It wasn't just a couple of £100 or anything.
No,
It was like way obscene price.
Yeah, like an iPod would have been what, €250-300, let's say.
Yeah, like even iPods, like the first iteration was a couple of hundred, and this guy's there was.
So now you wouldn't even have an iPod; you'd have your phone, and that's it. Like,
the phone does everything now.
Yeah,
so
you have streaming and that. But yeah, apparently the company Pono Music, it did end up closing in April 2017. He announced that it was discontinued because there wasn't probably enough interest in it. He had, it probably worked, did its job, but a lot of people wouldn't care. I suppose
the user adoption wouldn't have been there, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But also, I'll leave it with this one last one. When he went to Los Angeles in the 1960s, of course, this was summer of love. He would have rubbed shoulders with Joni Mitchell and Mama Cass and all these people. And another man that he rubbed shoulders with was one Charles Manson. Yes. So they would have, he would have known Dennis Wilson, which was the drummer of the Beach Boys. And Dennis Wilson was a mate of Charles Manson.
Yeah. That's right.
They would have obviously hung out, partied. And so I'll just read off this quote here now. In his memoir, Neil recalls, a guy showed up, picked up my guitar and started playing a lot of songs on it. His name was Charlie. He was a friend of the girls and now of Dennis, which was Dennis Wilson. His songs were off the cuff, things he made up as he went along. They were never the same twice in a row, kind of like Dylan, but different because it was hard to glimpse a true message in them. But the songs were fascinating. He was quite good. But he actually put in a good word for Charles with his record label and tried to get him a record deal. But then
Wilson had to do this. Wilson had to do the same, and there's a lot of conjecture and stories around it. But the one everyone remembers is the relationship between Manson and Wilson, and what happened there. Was it a case that he wasn't letting him into the Beach Boys at the time, and then it was just that was it, trigger flip.
Yeah, and then sure, the whole Sharon Tate murders went down in 1969. That kind of killed the whole Summer of Love, and sure, everyone knew who Charles Manson was after that. So that was a dark turn. Game over. Yeah. But yeah, by all means, he was he continues to be a massively prolific.
Always there in the background. Always there.
Always working. And he even said of his last album, I was listening to one, the Conan O'Brien podcast, this was just before the release of Colorado. He did an 11-day stint in the studio, all day, all night, like full on. And that was we recorded the album. And that's when he said, I wouldn't work with me.
No, it's like, don't get me wrong, if someone's offering that amount of free studio time, you're going to want to maximize it. But I think that many days a week, day and night, you're going to get some interest in lyrics and interest in guitar parts towards the latter stage.
Apparently it was like in conjunction with the full moon. So while the full moon was in the sky, they'd be recording this kind of thing. So
if it works, it works.
If it works. That's it. But I think we've reached the end of our episode. Unless you want to add any bit more about Neil Young, or do you have any?
No, just like I said, the influence, I think, is what we wanted to dig into, and it's been a nice little trip through his life there, a nice little journey. There's a lot in there that I didn't know, but
exactly,
given the age he's at, there's probably a lot more stories hidden there that were never reported.
Absolutely. Like, we probably even just scratched the surface with what we did go through.
We've got what was made public.
Exactly, what was made public. And of course, like, before I did this research on him, I didn't know all that much about him. I know who he was, and obviously I've played a few, rocking in the free world before and that kind of stuff. But now I do have a huge appreciation for him, and
there's a new appreciation has came to surface there.
Yeah, and definitely have to go and check out his country album that had Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings on. So I'm definitely going to have to check that one out. But I suppose before we go, again, thanks very much for listening to us, and thanks again to Walker for joining me on my second episode.
Thanks for having me. It's been great, insightful as well.
And again, tell the lovely listeners, where can they actually find you on the old
Yeah,
socials?
the easiest place is Instagram. Find me Walker Tex 69. If you want to look for me on the streaming platform of your choice, just search Walker Tex, and you'll find a few of the cover tunes there.
Yeah, I definitely recommend putting on a set of headphones, turning off the light, and just like losing yourself in his music. It's actually like, I'm not just blowing smoke now. It's actually like chef's kiss. Lovely stuff.
Oh, thanks very much. It means the world.
Absolutely. But yeah, thanks very much for listening. I will put Walker's links in the description below, and do go check out his music. Here's his upcoming song in September 12th, didn't you say?
September 12th, yeah. So there'll be a few little preview snippets of that hitting the Instagram page soon. Yeah. So yeah, keep an eye out for that one.
Brilliant. And as always, you can follow the Copper's Corner podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And this will be up on video form. I suppose it's too late to say now or at the end, but the video form and audio form. And do hope you enjoy it. And if you ever do want to give us feedback on how we're getting on, what you'd like to see from the podcast in the future, and let us know. But I do have a few more guests lined up. We were talking about a few more amazing singers going forward. And do stick with us, hit follow, hit subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. And again, I want to say thank you very much to Walker for coming on and talking about the legend that was Neil Young. And we hope to talk to you again. Sure, we'll have an old jam and a few pints at some point.
Been a pleasure. Yeah, we will. We have to have a jam. Always looking for people to play around with.
Brilliant. But that's it for now, and we'll see you then next week. All the best.